Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our lecture series on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. We continue this very long section on the misdeeds that we should avoid by beginning with this sentence: to shoot the birds and hunt the bees. Now, just like the other parts of this section, in fact, the various misdeeds are actually grouped together. So there are a cluster of sentences that we will be covering at the same time together. So here, the further sentences include exposing the dormant and disturbing the nested, filling burrows and upturning nests, injuring those in the womb, as well as damaging eggs. Now, as you can see, all of these various sentences, all of these misdeeds that we should avoid relate to harming and killing living creatures, so various living creatures. We'll start with the very first sentence, and if we break down the various words, you can see that it talks about shooting down, the flying, and pursuing, hunting those that move on land. So really all creatures, not just the feathered friends. And I guess this shooting and hunting, that's really only referring to two means, but actually regardless of the way that you shoot or you hunt or harm, so whether it's by firearms, by net, etc., by chemical means, or regardless of the motivation. It could be for profit, could be for fun, sports, food, etc. For all of the various means, methods, and motivations, it's really the same misdeed. Okay, so it encapsulates this whole scope. So I guess when we read in the collected commentaries of the Exalted Treatise, you encounter various stories. And as part of explaining these sentences, I'll be providing some stories as well to help you understand. The first story for this particular sentence is about a Mr. Dong. Now, it's interesting, you might have realized that whenever the collected commentaries or the collectania sort of record stories of negative examples in history, they don't often give the full name. And there's a reason for that. It was to, I guess, preserve a bit of anonymity by not drawing attention to that individual, and therefore meaning that the whole family suffers from the ill repute. Essentially, recording the story is important because it provides a warning to future generations and a lesson that we all should learn so that we don't make those same mistakes. But at the same time, a degree of anonymity is preserved by just letting us know the last name of this particular person. So we know that it is a real story. It's not just made up. So this Mr. Dong, what did he do? Well, he would, for his business, to make a living, he would catch and roast birds. Okay, so this was what he did every day, 365 days of the year, for many years. And it was a strange way of sort of cooking the birds. What he would do was that he would stick a bamboo pole or rod through the heads of the birds, and then use a certain rice straw to cook them and normally roast them. Now, I guess, if you think about it, it's a bit like, stringing sort of things on a kebab in a way, but it would sort of roast many at the same time. So this is not something that was very done very often, but this was the way that he did it. And what's interesting was that over many years, he developed a very strange medical condition. So this medical condition was such that his skin became quite coarse throughout his body. And so much so that it was almost like the bark of a tree. So it was very thick, coarse. And not only was this a transformation of his appearance, but on top of that, there was also a great deal of discomfort because this skin condition was quite itchy. It was so itchy that nothing helped with the itch. And the only thing that would provide some temporary relief was to burn the stalks of a rice plant and then apply this heat, this burning heat, to his skin, to his own skin, to reduce the sort of discomfort of the itch. So in essence, he was sort of burning his skin. And then on top of that, it was not just sort of the skin condition, but also there was really throbbing, severe headaches. Okay, so he'd also get these headaches throughout the day. And it was so bad, again, nothing worked for pain relief, that he would have to get someone to hit him on the head by using a bamboo pole to strike him on the head, so much so that the pain from the strike would temporarily relieve the internal throbbing pain of the headache. So, so he was actually experiencing constant pain, so much so that he had to sort of burn himself for this itch and hit himself to be able to get some temporary relief. So you can see, of course, that the skin condition, this headache, and the things that he uses to try to help himself all comes back to what he was doing to the birds, and how he killed them. This way of, as we said, sticking a bamboo pole through their heads and then roasting them. Now, ultimately, he dies from this very strange condition. Now, you might say, well, there's no particular, research that tells us that, this very strange and peculiar condition was at all related to his misdeeds. And it might just be a coincidence. Well, actually, there's another story that provides a bit more of a clear-cut cause and effect. This is the story of a Mr. Liu, and he would also kill birds. He'd kill them, shoot them down using a crossbow. Now, the crossbow, if you're not familiar with it, is a kind of arrow, like it's a kind of weapon that shoots several arrows at the same time or in succession, in the sense that it's much more advanced and much more efficient as a weapon of killing than just a normal bow and arrow. So he would use this very lethal weapon to shoot down the birds. So you can imagine that the lives that the birds he killed were countless as well. This was not just, on the course of one outing, but actually, again, over some period of time. And one day, he's, leaning next to a door. He develops a very sort of strange itch, a very sudden itch in his ears. So it's sort of inside the ear. And, he needs to scratch it to sort of relieve that itch. So, because it's quite deep in the ear, needs to find for a sort of thin object. He looks around and he sees his arrow, which is obviously very sharp and it's got a thin point. So he uses the arrow to scratch the inside of his ear, the tip of that arrow. But what happens is that when he's doing this, there's a sudden gust of wind that blows the jaw and it slams onto his arm. and the arm that's holding the arrow, and this arrow lodges into his ear, and it's a fatal wound. He bleeds to death. So, the arrow that he uses to kill the birds, ultimately he dies by the very same arrow. And in this case, you can see that there's this. It's more than just a coincidence. We know from our studies of the Exalted Treatise, of course, that any misdeed, these misdeeds, lead to misfortune. So our lifespan will be decreased. We read early in the opening passage, our lifespan will be decreased. And even before we feel the effects of that, we might experience misfortune, such as people resenting us, things not going our way, for example, not getting the promotion we wanted, encountering man-made or natural disasters. So, for example, flooding, etc. And then, things happening to our families, property being lost, being fined, etc. And then ultimately, losing our lives, so having a short life. And you can see that, these stories, the way they're recorded, can be quite short in order to sort of let us know to make us understand very clearly the cause and the effect. But, in the interim, these people, the misfortune that they might have experienced is not recorded. But you can imagine that, from the accumulation of these misdeeds of shooting these countless birds, or in the first case roasting them, then they probably did encounter some warning signs before the end of their life. So quite clearly, this misdeed is something that we should avoid. So that's the first sentence. The second sentence is exposing the dormant. So exposing is, I guess, any insects that are hibernating, that are dormant, just like in the photo here. The butterfly in the chrysalis, they're lying dormant, waiting for the right season to emerge from that chrysalis. Obviously, there are animals, but even other insects as well may be hibernating. So exposing them would be to dig them out, and therefore, they're not ready to be to experience or exposed to the elements, in which case they might freeze and ultimately die. So that's the exposing the dormant or the hibernating creatures. The second part of the sentence is disturbing the nested. Disturbing means to startle or frighten them, causing them to panic. Essentially their perch is their home. So we need to understand that if we are going out into the wild, but not even the wild, just generally parks and things like that, these are the homes of other creatures. So we are the visitors in a way, and we need to be mindful and considerate. Of course, when we are going camping, going out into the wild, we also need to be aware of where we dispose of our water, hot ashes, etc., lighting fires on the ground, and be aware not to harm insects, the dormant and the nested, etc. The story in the collected commentary refers to a Mr. Young, and he would catch birds for a living. And obviously, and the way that he caught them was to sort of catch them unawares when they were nested or perched in a tree. So these were resting birds, as opposed to the previous sentence, which was shooting birds that were flying. He had a particular method. He would climb up the trees and use a bamboo pole upon which he sort of applied sticky glue, and then he would use that to basically catch the birds, because they would stick to this pole and they wouldn't be able to pull away. Now, obviously, this is something that he did over, again, a period of time. The story is that in this particular instance, the branch that he's standing on suddenly snaps, and he falls to the ground. You can imagine sustaining quite severe injuries. But on top of that, the stick that he uses to catch the birds falls perpendicular to the ground and ultimately penetrates his head. And it's, again, it's a fatal injury. So this very chilling story of the cause and effect, again, helps us to think about, well, it's not just for, these disturbing the nested, exposing the dormant, is something that we have to take seriously. And, misdeeds accumulated will cause misfortune. We will experience the consequences. It's just a matter of time. So that's in particular in relation to this sentence. The third sentence is about filling up burrows and upturning nests. So filling up is, I guess, sealing, covering up the entrance or the exit of that burrow. The burrow cannot necessarily just be that of, for example, ants' nests, but as you can see here, squirrels, rabbits, etc., also have these burrows. It's essentially their homes. And the nests, again, makes us think of birds, to cover or overturn, essentially to disturb and disrupt, and even to destroy that nest. So we know, of course, that birds nest, they lay eggs in their nest. There's a certain incubation period in which sometimes it could be even up to 1 month. Now, when those eggs hatch, the baby birds are quite defenseless. And by upturning these nests, now let's say, for example, here in this sentence, we're not necessarily talking about killing. Okay? It doesn't say that you shoot the animals. It's really just disrupting their homes to the extent that they may not have a home. And as a result, the consequences that one's own family breaks down. Okay? So according to the commentary, explains that the consequence of this misdeed is that our own family has conflict, leading to separation, divorce, or generally disharmony. And you might think to yourself, well, obviously this conflict between partners or between family members, that's just something that, is between people. How's that related to the misdeed of damaging or upturning another living creature's home? Well, this is where the principle of causality, this idea of retribution, is important, that everything that we do actually leads to specific consequences. And obviously it has misfortune generally, but the misfortune is also quite specific. So here it says, if you destroy the homes of others, then your home will experience disharmony, ultimately separation itself. So this is something that we have to be very clear about, be mindful of. The fourth one, the fourth sentence, is not difficult to understand. Essentially, it is, you can see here in the 4 sentences that are related to living creatures, that there are nuances, there are subtleties. So before we're talking about, okay, it's a nest, you're not the home in which the birds, these young birds may grow, may be nurtured, is destroyed. But here it's saying that this is even before the animals are born, and the womb, the fetus, when they're at the fetal stage, when they're in the egg stage, they are not even given the chance to be born, to live. Now, most people might think that, okay, well, they're not even born. They're not really considered alive. But here, the Taoist thinking in the Exalted Treatise is that they are already alive. And they also deserve the opportunity to be born and to have that life. So this is the idea that really a living creature in any stage of its life, whether it's at the fetal stage, in the egg stage, the very early stages of life within the nest, or even as an adult, they deserve to be respected, to be at least given that chance to live and not to suffer. So the idea is that we don't injure the unborn children of any creature. And what happens as a result if we do this? What's the consequence of this misdeed? Is that we ourselves will not be able to have any children. Okay, so again, the cause and effect is quite specific. That if we injure the unborn children of other creatures, then we ourselves will not be able to have children. This is the Taoist thinking. So everything that happens in our life has this earlier cause, and we can't blame others. If we find that there are encounter certain difficulties now, we need to use these texts to reflect on ourselves, or at least to prevent ourselves from doing any wrongdoing and to accumulate the merit, which will then ultimately help us in our circumstances. It's very important that we're very clear about each of these lines and these sentences. So ultimately, as I said, really different ideas are explored in the 4 sentences, but actually when you bring them together, it is this idea that we have to preserve life. We have to nurture life as opposed to harming, damaging life at any stage. So to treat living creatures, non-human creatures, in the same way, in that we consider them as well. In particular, in the Buddhist context, there are specific ideas, and I really would recommend this book in terms of understanding that the Buddhist precept of not killing, which is very, very fundamental. Venerable Orling's book, Awaken to the Buddha Within, is very accessible for anyone to read and understand. And I've just taken an extract from it so that you have this understanding of why it is that in Buddhism it talks about this idea of not killing. So here she explains that the first precept of the 5 basic precepts of Buddhism, or even the 10 virtuous conducts, the very first is always to refrain from killing. And in Buddhism, this not killing is this reverence for life in general. Okay? And it's when we revere life, we are compassionate, we think about not only ourselves and how we might feel in different situations. We want to avoid pain, we want to avoid suffering, sickness and death. Well, we can also imagine that other living creatures would as well. So if we can have that compassion for our own family members, for the human race, then we should extend that to those of the non-human. So the any living creature. So try to be mindful of everything we're doing, because we don't want to inadvertently kill or hurt another living being. And I think that, everyone who's listening here would not, intentionally kill or hurt another living being, but probably we need to be aware of what we're doing, in which case we may inadvertently harm other living creatures. She continues, the Venerable continues by providing various strategies. So first, we can be aware of where we're walking so that we don't carelessly step on living creatures. So for example, just something that you could do in your everyday life is that, if there is a pathway, that we generally walk on the cemented pathway as opposed to walking on grass. So walking on the lawn. And why that is the case is because if you've ever sort of even dug up some grass, you'll know that, there are a lot of different insects that have, it's their home. So when we walk on the grass, it's also the homes of other living creatures. So if there happens to be a walkway, we choose to take the walkway as opposed to the grass. So that's just something very, very simple that you can do wherever you are. The second strategy that the Venerable suggests is to keep our homes clean. Something that we should do generally. But the added benefit, on top of the fact that it's a neat and tidy environment for ourselves and we are able to find what we want where we want it, is that we don't attract these insects, we might call pests, mice, etc., cockroaches. And then because we don't attract them, they're not attracted by food lying around, etc., surfaces that are unclean, sticky, then we don't need to think about how to get rid of them, to eliminate or eradicate pests, by actually removing the cause of them even coming into the homes. So by keeping our homes clean, just generally on a weekly basis, clean, keep the entire home clean, including windows, sills, etc., then we attract fewer insects into the home, which means reduces the likelihood of having to deal with removing them. That's quite easy to understand, and it's something that we should be doing generally, even for our own sake and not just for the insects. And then, well, what happens if you do have these pests? So, for example, mice. Then we can use, the Venerable explains that we can use traps that capture them alive, and then free them in another space. And we also have to, if we are freeing them, we also have to make sure that that space or that area is safe, that we're not just releasing them so that in the next moment they will be killed anyway. And this is something that I've been doing for quite some time, is that, if there's a mosquito or a fly in the house, is find a way of killing it, but to find a cup or a container and sort of, cupping it and sort of transporting it outside, sort of escorting it outside, you could say. And, in this way, you develop your compassion. I think for most people, when they see a mosquito, they immediately feel annoyed, particularly if you're trying to sleep. But essentially, it's about thinking about, well, other than being annoyed and trying to kill them in some way, well, they can live as well, but just in a different space. And perhaps moving them outside is the best. So this is something that we can all do in our daily lives. I think these are very practical strategies. And for some people, they might say, well, what happens if our homes have these pests? How is it that we can actually get rid of them if we just simply move them outside when they just come back in? The point, as was mentioned here, is to try to eliminate the causes. What is it if it's inside our home that's causing them to come in? Are there certain spaces that they particularly are attracted to? Maybe it's not food, maybe it's a certain area that's damp and dusty and seems to be quite a good home for insects. Well, maybe we can clean that up. So it's sort of understanding their life, understanding what they make their home, and ensuring that the places that we want to stay safe in for ourselves, but also safe for them, so we don't step on them inadvertently. We try to create the right causes and conditions so that they stay outside rather than come back in. And so it takes a bit more thinking, but when you do that research, it makes you more aware of other life forms. It makes you more understanding of where they're coming from, why it is that they keep coming back in, and then you're able to change in a way that prevents them from coming back in forever. So it's not just a once-off, pesticide that kills, the insect or the cockroach that you see in front of you, but actually maybe behind the walls there's hundreds of others. It's actually thinking about addressing the root cause. And I think that sort of intelligent way of thinking is something that you can take with you wherever you are, whatever home you are part of, wherever you call home in the future, and not just in this home. So it's something that is much more comprehensive. It's a more comprehensive strategy for living, and living ultimately in harmony with others, with other creatures, means that you are, in a way, thinking outside yourself. So I like these strategies, and I would challenge you, I would encourage you to think of your own, whatever pests that you encounter in your own living spaces, to think about what it is that, why they're there, what it is that they're doing, how it is that are their life patterns, and to understand that. Okay. Ultimately, at the very basic element, why do this? Isn't it much more simple to just kill them and be done with it, as it says? Aren't these animals just lower life forms? They're smaller than us, etc. Well, actually, this is something that is at the very heart of the Buddhist tradition, which is that we come to this human form with various afflictions. Ignorance and arrogance are two sort of fundamental afflictions that we have. So, misconceptions that we can be superior than others. We incorrectly believe that we're superior. Well, what's the reality? The Buddha explains that within every being, there is a true nature that is identical not only to ourselves, but actually to all Buddhas. So this is very, very important, that actually all beings, even these insects, like even a cockroach, they actually have this Buddha nature. So that equal not only to humans, right, but actually equal to the Buddhas. It's something that I think if you don't read about it in these Buddhist texts, you don't really think about it. That you just naturally look down on these so-called lower life forms like insects and other animals. And so these enlightened beings. So who are the Buddhas? Right? Are they just simply the statues that we see in temples, or the pictures of Shakyamuni Buddha, etc.? Actually, the Buddhas, this word, the Buddha, is simply a term to describe someone who is enlightened. And anyone can be enlightened. So these enlightened beings, what is enlightened about them is that they have uncovered and realized their innate self-nature, this true nature. And that's different from just saying that, I've understood myself, or I understand who I am, my identity, my human identity, is actually this self-nature that is, according to the Buddhist belief, is common to all creatures, all beings, all sentient beings. Now, as humans, as when we learn, actually, we realize that we do have also this true nature, but it's just hidden, as it says here, buried within us. Through the cultivation, through learning, through practices such as respecting all life, being considerate of all life forms, these sorts of practices, it's through this that we develop this compassion and we finally awaken and uncover our own true nature. And at that point, we too will be Buddhas. We too will be enlightened. So this is the Buddhist thinking. And so, as it says here, since all beings have this nature, we are by nature equals. Our lives might be different. Our life forms, as you can see, even between humans, we look very different. We have different circumstances. We're born in different families, have different careers and futures, etc. Our lives might be different, and that's because of what we did in the past, in previous lifetimes. Now, what we've done, you can see the very long list of good deeds and the very, very long list of misdeeds that we've been covering in the Exalted Treatise. But that's really just, a summary even of all the different types of deeds and misdeeds in general. So these are all causes that we might have planted, so deeds that we've performed in previous lifetimes. And because different people do different things, they react to the same situation differently, well, that leads to different consequences. So Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism all talk about this idea of, what we do. Our lives are determined by what we've done. Now, you may say, well, I haven't done anything wrong. Well, this may be because in your previous life, you had actually committed some misdeeds and you're now facing the consequences. And as part of that, you simply need to continue to accumulate the merit today, right here in this moment and every moment, to ensure that you will be able to accumulate the fortune, the good fortune for the future. And, ultimately, after you have finished, because they finished, the sufferings that were the consequences of your previous deeds. So all of these causes are stored in our consciousness. So everything that we've done, even if we don't remember what happened in the past, in past lifetimes, or even when we were a child, all of it is actually stored. And this storage is sort of like different seeds that ultimately will develop, sprout, and bear fruit. And the fruit is the so-called consequences that we will experience. So this is the Buddhist thinking, which then gives us a different, a more sort of thorough perspective of why is it that, you have these, you perform these misdeeds and then you experience such a sort of a fatal outcome or untimely passing, etc. And then ultimately, in this book, she talks about how we need to continue to learn these various, learn from the ancient wisdom and create the right causes and conditions. So when certain conditions are right, they will mature, bring forth corresponding consequences, while all the others will remain dormant. All of that, basically, what that means is that we see the animals around us. We might see insects, and that's a reflection of what they've done in the past. And as a result, they have certain causes, they have certain conditions, and the consequences of having this animal form, and therefore being despised by everyone, including humans. And when we see that, we should give rise to this mind of compassion, be reminded that, if we just simply give rise to frustration and then kill that mosquito or that fly, then we ourselves fall into the same trap. We are ignorant. We think we're better than them, or we commit these misdeeds, and then ultimately we will suffer consequences in the future like them. So really, seeing them is actually a reminder for ourselves to continue cultivating in the right way. So continue learning and practicing. And the various ideas that we've looked at today are the practice of compassion for all life forms, for all creatures, great and small. So yes, this is exactly as I've just explained, that the plant, the causes planted in this lifetime allows us to be the person that we are, the conditions that we experience. And then when we look at that animal, it helps us understand that they have planted different causes and we have to avoid that. So next time our roles could be reversed if we're not careful. Now, another kind of practice that is followed by Buddhists that is also worth mentioning here is what's known as the 3 pure meat rules. So that is that, if you're not vegetarian, for example, to at least not eat meat if you see it being killed, if you hear it being killed for you, or if you suspect that the animal was killed for you. So this idea of the 3 pure meat rules. But ultimately, you can see that many traditions of schools of Buddhism advocate being vegetarian or vegan because of this idea of this constant cycle of suffering. That if you kill others, then that leads to the consequence of being killed yourself, and therefore it's this endless cycle. And that's why the Buddhist tradition will advocates being vegetarian, being vegan, and sort of ending that cycle. So whatever the reason is, if you become vegetarian for purposes of your faith or that of animal welfare, animal rights, environmental concerns, ultimately at the very heart of it, regardless, it is this compassion, understanding the suffering of others, respecting all beings. And as a result of that, if you can make that change in your life, then actually vegetarians live longer and they are more healthy. So this is something that, I think in the recent decades, there's been this increasing trend because we realize that not only is eating meat has negative consequences for our health, but also increasingly the environment. And so, at least in the UK, they have Meatless Mondays, this kind of project to encourage people to at least have one day of the week meat-free. And obviously now when we go to supermarkets, there's many different varieties of plant-based products, vegetarian, vegan, etc. So really there is no excuse not to at least give those a try and to experience better health, the effects on our health. I also remember a very famous quote by Philip Wallen, an Australian who has really devoted his life to this idea of kindness and compassion towards all living creatures. He says that when we suffer, we actually suffer as equals in their capacity to suffer. A dog, as a pig, as a bear, as a boy, because everyone, when you feel pain, all animals can feel that pain. And all animals will, as we said before, we want to avoid pain, we want to avoid sickness and suffering and death. So really, if we know that we don't want these things, why should we force it on others? And he came to this conclusion through his own life experiences. I'm not sure if you've heard of Philip Wallen before, but he was, I think at the age of 34, he was the vice president of Citicorp, and basically Citibank, and basically was very, very successful in his career. But through his, through his success, he also was able to observe a lot. And he says that really hit him when his father had cancer. Obviously, cancer is a very painful condition. And he said that during his time being with his father in hospital, he heard the screams of his father, the cries of his father, in those times when the pain was the worst. And previously, as part of his career, when people wanted to invest money in slaughterhouses, he would have toured there. He would have gone there first to have a look. And said that he had seen and he'd heard those screams before in slaughterhouses, in dog meat markets, and cattle ships, and the dying mother wail as the harpoon explodes in her brain as she calls out to her calf. And he realized that the cries of his father, when he closed his eyes, was the same as those of the animals when they're about to die, when they were dying, when they were suffering. And he says that that's when it hit him that when we suffer as equals. And that scream is identical in any species, in any language. So not just as a human, wherever you are, but also as any living creature. And that's why he changed careers and decided to take up and really be the voice for the voiceless, for to encourage humans to think again and to develop their compassion. So very inspiring figure, but also makes us see things from that different perspective as well, and why it is that these lines in the Exalted Treatise that they were written in the Exalted Treatise. You could say that it is the Taoist tradition, but actually it's universal in a way that these practices, wherever you are, if you're able to do this, then this is something that develops your compassion that is innate to all of us. Now, I want to move on to the next few lines in the time that we have left. And again, so there's this cluster of sentences that helps you sort of think about one idea, but from different angles. So this cluster of misdeeds, so just quickly, the first sentence, hope that someone fails, then to ruin someone else's success, endanger others for personal safety, impoverish others for personal gain. What's the common denominator here? Essentially, is really bringing about someone else's misfortune or hoping that someone encounters misfortune so that you yourself can succeed. So at the end of the day, it is always thinking about yourself to the detriment of others. So in this case, very much to the detriment of others, that you think that if others fail, if others suffer, then you will come out on top. So this hoping that someone fails is this so-called failure is not just any sort of but is not just any failure, but it could be that they lose something, they lose their job, they make some sort of mistake. Now, if they have made that mistake, that's it's their loss. But here you are hoping and wishing that they do. And that's very, very different. So that's why this is a misdeed. If we see someone else failing or losing or being, experiencing misfortune in any way, that deserves our sympathy, let alone hoping that they experience misfortune that's sort of even one step worse, in the sense that they haven't failed and you're hoping that they will. And I guess if we think about it, why might someone give rise to this thought? Well, maybe the other person, okay, they might not have experienced any success, but seemingly they have a very good life. Perhaps they have a good family, a very harmonious family, a brilliant career. Everything's going smoothly for them. They have a profitable business. And you think that if they were to fail in some way, then you might be able to gain. So you could be colleagues. If they make some mistake, then they're not going to be so favored by the boss, and then you might get that promotion. Or let's say that you're a competing business. It's the same market, it's the same customers. If the other company, does something wrong, loses their reputation, then you stand to gain. And interestingly, I think this is that most people might say, okay, well, if you are in a competition, say, for example, sports, there's only one person that gets the Grand Slam. There's only one person that comes first, right? So, you are, and most people would hope that their competitors fail and lose in some way. But actually, I think that if you ask the sportsmen, the people who are competing, the ones who are succeeding, the ones who do come out first, they are not competing with others. They're actually competing against themselves. So if they have a personal best, they want to better it. Now, just by bettering everyone else in their competition doesn't necessarily mean that they will better themselves. Or nor does it mean that they will achieve a world record. So the only person that they really should be competing against is themselves. What did I do before that I can do better? And that has nothing to do with whatever anyone else does, whether they are performing best or worst, giving their best performance or their worst performance, because actually the only person that you can really ask of is yourself. The only person that you can really improve is yourself. So regardless of what anyone else is doing, you simply need to ask yourself, am I doing what I should be doing? Am I improving on my previous record? If you're at work, am I fulfilling my responsibilities to the best of my responsibility? And that's all that anyone can really ask for. And what others do is their own lives, whether they through your inspiration they also achieve and they're inspired, well then that's actually really a good thing. So similarly, if you say, okay, well, that might be okay if you're talking about sports or, generally as individuals, but what about businesses? Doesn't everyone just compete for the same sort of market, for the same demographic, for example? Well, actually, they might be competing, but at the same time, it's not about whether your competitor gets more of the market or less. At the end of the day, it's because of the competition that you have to evaluate yourself even more. You have to think about what it is that I can offer to the clients, the customers, the community that helps them in the best way. And it's because of that competition, it's because of the others that makes you think about how you can really help. And not be arrogant and thinking that you're the only person in the market and everyone has to come to you, and therefore it doesn't matter about how good you are to your customers. By actually having someone else on the market, you improve. So again, it's the same principle that you actually are improving yourself constantly. And if you can do that, then, whatever happens to others is their lives. And in fact, by improving yourself, you are influencing and inspiring others in the best way. So this is something that is very important, not only in Taoist terms, but also from the Confucian perspective. Just leave this for next time, this story. But from a Confucian perspective, Mencius explains that there's actually no attribute, there's no greater attribute of a noble person, the exemplary person, than their helping others to practice virtue. That actually, if you take the opposite of these sentences, or this particular sentence about hoping that another person fails, well, what's behind that? If you step away from thinking about the external environment, if you step away from thinking about others, then the important thing is to develop your own virtue and to see others if they are succeeding in some way, if they are doing good in some way, to help others to do the same. And I think that that's the greater mindset that we should be developing, that it's not about how are others performing compared to me, and if they're performing better in some way, if they are more noble or more virtuous in some way, then it impacts badly on me because then I look bad and therefore I would be jealous of that. I think that the teachings, whether it's Confucian or Taoism, tells us to look not on the outside but on the inside, and to question, are we doing the best that we can, regardless of what others are doing. And if they are doing good things, if they are accumulating merits, then we should help and encourage them and learn from them so that we can continue improving ourselves and ultimately cultivate this noble aspect of ourselves, that ultimately, from the Confucian perspective, to be a sage, to be a noble person, and from the Buddhist perspective, to realize this enlightenment, to realize the greater self, the true nature. So I'll leave you with those thoughts, that cluster of sentences we will continue to talk about next week. I think this starts a very good discussion on how we can think about the great aspects of ourselves and challenge ourselves to stretch ourselves to achieve higher and more noble aspirations. So we'll continue this conversation next week. Thank you very much for listening. Hope to see you next week.